am now going to pass this over to Nicholas to take over and tell us everything we need to know about branding.
Wow, Marie, that's an enormous vote of confidence for me.
Set the stage.
That's awesome. So, hello everybody out there. It's interesting speaking to a screen, but I imagine all these enthusiastic attendees, and I really want to thank you, Marie, for the opportunity to speak my truth. As a corporate shaman, or I like to call myself a brand shaman now. And I'm going to talk about the B before the C, why you should source your brand before your content. So everybody can see the screen, Marie. Everything's good over there. See you nodding, thumbs up, and everything. And let me introduce myself. So as Marie said, I am actually a corporate shaman. I have about 10, 12 years of formal shamanic training under my belt with North American elders and South American elders. And I've traveled around the world working with elders and wise people who I think know a lot more than me, and they're good people to learn from. My mission ultimately is to put the spirit back into work. I want to bring spiritual sense back to the corporate world. So by drawing on timeless practices and universal principles, I try to restore balance and craft a sustainable path forward for businesses. And what I do for a job is I actually manage brand alignment, balance, and integrity from our first engagement in our agency with clients right through to execution and implementation. This is my agency, Brand is Truth. It was founded about 4 years ago. A little gang of orphans. We were all creatives without a job, actually. We'd been fired effectively from our previous client who ran out of money. And when you put creative people in a basement and they've got nothing to do, they come up with some really great stuff. And that's what we did. We came up with this. This is fundamentally all you need to know about Brand is Truth. This is the entire model. I show it to our clients right away in all the presentations and the first engagement. I talk to them about this model, and I'd like you to keep it in the background as I talk, and I'm going to talk a lot. So remember these two spheres. One is brand awareness, one's business performance, and I like to think about it as a new paradigm of brand building, okay? And the idea is that it forces our clients to actually look at their investment equally into brand awareness and business performance. So on the left, we have brand awareness. It's value. You might be familiar with this. It's your brand personality, your positioning, the mantra, the expression, your look and feel. And we say it's fundamentally an expression of culture. And this is qualitative and circular. It's not so linear. And it builds value over time. And on the right is the business performance side that most business owners are really familiar with. This is quantitative and linear. It gives you the return. You start to get focused on competition, customers, the buying journey in the market, and fundamentally, it's a function of customer experience. So here's what we say. We say that business results on the right and brand value on the left equals business value. That's the bottom line. And here are the three principles, the key principles that we use to, drive the model forward. So I like to think of principles as being timeless and universal. If you know these principles, you pretty much know everything about building a brand and keeping it alive over time. It is deceptively simple. Alignment is really about a function of your brand's axis. So I think of this as your core purpose. Think of it like the spine. It's the values, the mission, the vision, the culture, and the story standing straight and strong. In the middle, you have balance. Balance is something we're quite familiar with, right? Obviously, I like to think of my clients as investing equally in each side of the equation, so proportionately in both brand awareness and business performance. But you can be out of balance in so many ways in a company, okay? You could be out of balance internally and externally, focus too much on your customers and not internally on your staff and your employees. And the last one is integrity. And integrity, I don't think of so much as ethical or values-based as much as a structural thing. It's really about the state of being whole and complete. So if there are no parts missing in the core or in each side of the equation, we say brand is true, right? It's whole and complete. It's a little abstract right now, but it'll get real very soon here. So next is, if I can make this move forward, please go. What's happening? There we go, Marie's our first technical glitch. There we go. Wonderful. Okay. So part one, setting the stage. I want to say a couple things about before I jump into this. One is, this is a journey. There may be twists and turns, but I'd like you to trust me along the way, and you'll get where you need to be. So hang on for the ride, and here we go. The very first thing I want to say as a trained shaman, before we get into any content about this presentation, before we get into the principles, before we tap any of the wisdom, I want to set the stage here in the biggest possible context I can think of. And you might have heard this in Canada, especially now. It is becoming a formal custom before large gatherings, especially with institutions, larger corporations, and a lot of the public bodies out there are acknowledging the land and the people that they sit on, right? So I want to first acknowledge the true and original source of this work. The work that I actually do came from the first people, the First Nations. They were here before we arrived in North America, and I'd like to say that this is an acknowledgement of the land and the first people because they were one and the same. So they're the original source of the wisdom on this planet. And I've traveled, like I said, around the world, and I've learned from Indigenous people here in Canada, in South America, in Europe, in Ireland, in Australia, in the Outback, and in Africa. So what they speak here before they start large meetings formally is that they say, in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. These were the first people who were here. And all the people who make their homes in this region of Southern Alberta. So with that note, I would like to tell you a little bit more context. This is the journey of Brand is Truth. I call it our journey, right? And it's important to acknowledge this because a lot changed over 4 years. Like I said, we formed a little collective in late 2016. And over the following years, we built the tools that I'm going to share with you in this presentation. But after that, around 2017, we spent 2 years in the trenches, like really hard work, focused on the intense work of long-term brand building. We worked with about 18 different brands, different businesses, in all kinds of client engagements, some of them lasting over 2 years. And we tested and we validated our tools, and we called it the way. Now, here's the thing about this I need to acknowledge, is that we never, in all that time, because we were so focused on our clients, never completed turning the lens on ourselves. And this is pretty common with agencies. We didn't do our own brand sourcing. We got clear what we were doing. We got huge value out of it. But we neglected our own voice. In fact, even our own social channels went silent. And this is also pretty common with creatives and agencies. But I have to say the value of what we created is carried in all of us. And I want to share it with you today. So this was the first blog that kind of put it out there. I wrote this in August 2017. And it was really the starting point, because this was when our findings and observations indicated that we'd entered into the era of the distruster. Okay, remember that term, the distruster, right? We're experiencing an epidemic level of consumer distrust, skepticism, and cynicism. And I'll share more about this later, but first we need to look at the source of this distrust with consumers. I'm going to take us back into history. Some of you may or may not recognize this gentleman. This is Hitler's propaganda minister. We're going back to the late 20s, early 30s, okay? We're going back in time. And the context of this conversation is basically an apology to the North American consumer. Because here's the state of the nation. If we look back at the source of modern marketing, the true origins of post-World War II marketing techniques and where it got us, you know, it's important to get an eagle view. This wasn't a very friendly eagle at the time in World War II, but sometimes that's the only way we can connect the dots. If you forget how you were sourced, your whole business, the genesis of your industry even, you can never begin to change or transform it. That's why this conversation is so important. So this is where it started. This is the father of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, and I say he's the first of the madmen. Here's the second of the madmen, okay? This is the father of public relations. You might recognize him. His name is Edward Bernays. He's also considered the inventor of bacon and eggs. So at the same time, while Goebbels was, teaching a whole country a new way to look at life, which wasn't very pleasant, Edward Bernays was solving the problem of not selling enough bacon. And how he married it to eggs and created an institution we think has always been the case in North America was actually the invention of another madman. So, but his work was foundational to sourcing the era of modern marketing. And where did this get us to? Someone quite familiar, right? This is one of the madmen we love to hate. He became very popular as Don Draper, the character, right? But what he represents is the great era of advertising, and even more mass persuasion that was fueled by even more creative content. So a quick review. Here's what we're dealing with as a legacy. From the 1930s forward in this past century, mass propaganda, mass public relations, and mass persuasion. So where did it leave us? Here, the last 20 years. And this is the beginning of the century, right? So this is what the last 20 years of this century looks like. This is the Edelman Trust Barometer. It's a global survey of trust. It's an extraordinary survey. I think it includes about 30, 40,000 respondents, and they've been doing it for 20 years in a row, literally gauging the level of trust in the world. So this is what I meant when I said earlier, we were experiencing in 2017 an epidemic level of consumer distrust, skepticism, and cynicism. Have a look at the evidence here, okay? These are the key takeaways. In other words, the summaries of these huge surveys that were done every year. We started Brand is Truth in 2016-17. I wrote that blog in August 2017. The headline for that takeaway for that survey around the world was Trust in Crisis. Let's dig in a bit more. Here's the 2020 Edelman Trust Barometer. These are all the countries indexed based on the level of distrust they have or the level of trust they have. Red means that the country is predominantly distruster nation. In other words, more people distrust than they trust. Look where Canada is, okay? We're sitting there about 50-50. And the bottom line is that half the population of this country, half the population of consumers are distrusters. So to confront this is really revealing because this is what you're marketing into. Now here's some good news, okay? When you look at this, and this is a long survey, even the report's about 40, 50 pages long. I highly recommend you check it out. This is what I see as good news. We know what counteracts the distrusters, what counteracts distrust. Fundamentally, based on this result, it's integrity, followed by dependability and purpose. 3 times as important as competence. Hold that thought. Here's the other piece that I want you to know about that sets the stage for this conversation and why the last 20 years looked the way it did. Like, why did we have a tidal wave of consumer distrust after all of those madmen did their work? I call it the psychic consumer, okay? We started to look at this in 2017. We did a few workshops on it. And we needed to confront that the subconscious actually rules everything for human beings. And it acts through emotion. We talk about this all the time in branding, right? The response to brand is emotional. So what's really happening? The subconscious processing speed of the consumer will defeat any conscious strategy of the marketeer. Where does this leave us? It's really challenging because our conscious processing speed, the best we've been able to calculate it, is about 40 bits per second, okay? The unconscious processing speed, and that is literally all the senses. If you accumulate all that data that's coming in from all our senses, it's about 68 billion times faster than the conscious mind. That's actually what's happening with the psychic consumer. That's the true speed of consumer brand consumption. So, where does it leave us now? It's been increasing exponentially in a feedback loop, okay? This is a story in the Atlantic. It came out just in March. Quite an amazing, earth-shaking story about Trump's campaign coming up. So we have an increasing exponential feedback loop, right? You pump out more content, because we've been talking about content marketing to be noticed. You get more noise. You have to face more noise generated from that content. So you pump out more content, you face more noise. So we've gone from mass propaganda to mass persuasion to mass manipulation. This story talks about the noise that's being added, okay? The amount of manipulation that's possible with the amount of money that's spent, with 14,000 different ads being served to voters, with 3,000 data points on every voter. And this is just a single individual in power who's been able to accumulate this data, pay for people to manage it, and then fund extraordinary social media campaigns to sway opinion. This is what you're marketing into. It's quite extraordinary. We never had to deal with this before, okay? So it leads me to this. At the end of the day, we started to confront that environment and set the stage for what we were about to do. The bottom line was simple. It's black and white. It's all about the truth. And if you want to talk about differentiation, ultimately brands are hungry for differentiation. What really makes you stand out against all that content, all that noise, all that manipulated noise? It's the D after the C. I think of it like as the differentiation after content. So I know I'm talking about brand, and brand being the B before C, so brand before content, but it's about truth, and brand is truth. And that's not a gratuitous plug. We just named the company, the agency, after this function, this principle, this equation. I call it, trust is a function of truth, and this is what it looks like in math. So truth is the foundation to trust. Trust is a function of truth. Truth, or the source of authenticity, will not only make you stand out, it's the only sustainable approach if you're playing a long game and you want to build lasting loyalty and genuine engagement with real human beings. So let's move on to part 2. I want to redefine brand for you, and I want to redefine branding. So this is another important conversation to set us up for what we're about to do. So here's some things to keep in mind. I want you to dive deeper and question everything. And this is not just during this presentation. It's a really healthy approach to everything you do in content marketing, in marketing in general, social media, and communication. Number 2 is the definitions are from the dictionary. I don't get caught up on definitions so much. They're in the realm of information, okay? I like to dive deeper. I like to create distinctions. Distinctions are like really sharp definitions that are tools in language. They are real tools, and I'm going to introduce some of those to you. When you have a tool and you learn how to use it, it lasts forever. If you have a definition as information, you'll forget it. And ultimately, differentiation is the key. Please keep those in the background as we dive into this. First of all, I want to share a little bit about how we define brand for our clients, okay? I use words like brand envelope, and I use words like foundation and architecture. I actually had a short stint as an architect working with an engineer. So I was basically building art that you could live in. So I was actually building residential homes. And I got really comfortable with this idea of actually concept right through to architecture, blueprint, and into the, the envelope or the foundation, what they call the building envelope, and then fundamentally the brand strategy. But this is how I walk my clients through it, so they really understand what we're about to do. So we charge good money for offering extraordinary value. So they really need to understand. I'm totally transparent about what our clients are going to get. And I explained to them in simple terms. I said, with this brand building process that we take on, we start with a concept. It could be a sketch on a napkin, typically. You're sitting down talking to someone about their dream home. And then we talk about brand architecture. When this can get quite complex, we talk about where all the rooms are, how they function, how they interrelate with each other. And this is, something that comes out after the concept is aligned on. And then you go to work and you start to build it. And the first thing you do is build a foundation. The foundation starts with the source. We're going to talk about the source in a little bit. And brand strategy is then a function of all of this coming together. So if you have the foundation, like the foundation of a house, and you build the envelope, an envelope is considered in building everything that surrounds the house. So it's everything inside it that's contained inside it. When you talk about brand strategy, you're talking about the entire house. You're talking about the fireplace going, smoke coming out of the chimney, right? The doors opening and closing. You're talking about conduits of channels of information going in, like you have your utilities and your cable and your water and sewer coming into the vat. The house now becomes a living member of the community. Just like a brand from a business starts to engage with the market. It becomes a very complex structure. But what is brand, right? We go look a little deeper. In the work that we do a lot of dreaming. I call it conscious dreaming. We literally have a process called a feed and seed where we sit down for an hour with a client that we first met and we tap root their dream. We do it over lunch and we do it in a boardroom. And we send them on a journey 10 years into the future and we record that dream with a graphic recorder. We call it dream catching. So we do a lot of really deep discovery work. We spend hours and hours in boardrooms, right? Our last client, I spent probably 12 hours over a period of 3 different sessions, 3 evenings, just really understanding the source of their brand. And why do we do that? Because brand is really pervasive. It gets deeply rooted in the psyche of the consumer. You want to think of brand as a psycho-emotional currency. It's a current that runs through people. And it has strong subconscious affinity. So it gets locked in there, remember at 320 gigabytes per second, right? 68 billion times faster than the conscious processing speed. Your brand is being imprinted on consumers. And there's a complex set of emotional behaviors that comes out of that. And we spend a lot of time trying to predict it. You know, we even employ artificial intelligence, but it's challenging. But what brand isn't is this. It's not just a logo or a mark. It's not your identity and your colors. The brand envelope includes those, but it isn't just this. I want to get that really clear because if you're about to take on sourcing your brand, you need a powerful context for the value of what you're creating. And brand is this valuable context. So how do we get there? How do we find our brand? Here's the next distinction I want to share with you, the next tool in language. We call it sourcing, or the source. In fact, if you look at the lower left here, you'll see this is actually the iconography we use to describe the way, the stages that we do the work for our client. We talk about the burst, which is a graphic they receive after the feed and seed. We talk about the source, which is actually a book. It's about 50, 60 pages for most clients. And we talk about the creative brief that might be more familiar to you that identifies the brand guidelines and things like that. The source really is a spring. It is a spring of everything. It's where all the nutrition, the vitality comes from in a brand. So we talk about sourcing always coming before creating content or strategy or anything. We always source a brand first, okay? So sourcing a brand, I'm going to use that language. It's something that you can use to define it distinctly and as an approach you use before you create anything. So how do you do it? How do you source something? You might notice I use a lot of metaphors and analogies in nature. I think nature is really reliable for offering universal principles and wisdom. It never lets you down, okay? So I go to a tree. I love trees. I've got one on my chest right now on this t-shirt. They're wonderful, wonderful metaphors for living organisms, for the way energy works, for how systems work. And this is where I got this distinction taprooting from. It was by watching seeds sprout. I started a program in schools in 2003 called Little Green Thumbs. And I really noticed every time we sprouted these seeds in classrooms to teach them about the value of food and growing their own food, the first thing a seed does, in its innate intelligence, it sends a tiny little root down into the soil, and it sends a first shoot, the first growth. You could call it the trunk, the beginning of the trunk, up into the sky, okay? An extraordinary thing that seeds do, right? And so in the middle of this screen, you can barely make out, there's a little purple dot that I've distinguished as the seed itself, and a little seedling growing. The seed then grows, right? So from recognizing the first root, the taproot, from a germinating seed, it grows down into the bottom of the tree. It continues as what's called the taproot to this day, okay? And that never changes. It just gets deeper, longer, bigger, but the taproot stays the taproot. So we talk about the seed of an oak tree. It's a taproot of an oak tree coming from a seed of an oak tree. It becomes an oak tree. And at the core of an oak tree is that original first branch that goes up. That's the source of an oak. An oak never wakes up 10 years after it started growing and goes, oh, I'm just going to grow some fir branches. So I'm going to get a fir tree on the top and an oak tree down in the roots. And this is what I see with branding all the time. I see like companies that have lost their way pretend to be fir trees on the top, and the branches no longer match the roots. And I say that's not brand as truth. And why? Because they've lost their originating intent. The why is what I think of as that original growth. It never goes away. The why of an oak tree is to be an oak tree. It's in the seed, like an inspiration as the source of it, right? So if you think of it and you cut a tree across and you look at that first growth, it's the middle of the rings. And that is your why. That's the foundational distinction we share with our clients to help them understand the why sources everything. Their why as a brand, when we source their brand, is at the core of who they are, what they do, and how they do it. So this is what a source document looks like. It is really a book, you know. It's a bound book. It's 50, 60 pages, and it covers a lot of things. We're going to look at some essential things today. But this is the result of weeks, sometimes months of our discovery stage. It takes time, and it takes a long time to actually distill information down after hundreds of pages of information. And what comes out of the source is another tool we call the blueprint. This is a brand blueprint. It's a mandala. It literally is a mandala that hangs in our clients' foyers, their entrances, their boardrooms, permanently. For the public, for the visitors, for the staff, for the employees, for everybody to see it. It's internal and external. So the inside has to match the outside for brand to be truth, right? And it captures the essence of the brand. I like to think of it as a mandala that captures the soul of the business. So I'm going to jump into some case studies to kind of make this real for you. I'm going to talk about two clients in particular. One is a wonderful life coach by the name of Heather that we worked with about 3 years ago. And the other is a more recent client that we had a cannabis producer, right? So I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because I want to get to the work that we're going to do in this presentation. So Heather is a client. She's a certified life coach. Came to us. She had been running her business and her practice, for over a decade. Absolutely awesome woman. This is the burst from Heather's feed and seed. It's the first encounter we had with her. We spent an hour with her. We taprooted her entire dream. The past, the future of her brand, and all the missing links. And the problem she had is that the coaching industry is packed with quick fix sales tactics, right? There's a lot of distrust and cynicism resulting because, potential prospects and other practicing coaches just don't trust what's going on in the marketplace. And she had to stand out. She had to differentiate in the face of that. So what was our objective? Our objective obviously was to brand her and do a brand launch and to differentiate herself in the marketplace with a new brand and create accurate messaging and engage her with her desired clients. This is a snapshot of her website page, okay, that took people on a journey. And what was unique about this journey is it was sourced by her blueprint. So we provided Heather with a brand building engagement that helped her clearly define her values, her vision, her mission, her culture, and the ideal target audiences to be sourced from before we even started designing a website. This was done. And the result? So Allison is listening right now. She was part of our collective, an expert in content marketing and social media, measured, 17% increase in Facebook following in the first 30 days, right? 10% average engagement rate and a 404 average post reach. Some of you will know more about what this means than even I will if you're listening. And I'm happy to answer more questions at a granular level about this, but it was really good. Heather's truth was being shared and the audience was responding. So fast forward to 2018, we started working with another client, right? This was a cannabis producer, Boaz Pharmaceuticals. They're a medical and recreational cannabis producer focused on locally grown, handcrafted small batch cannabis. Absolutely awesome little team, right? And they started like these three started this company. They're located in Calgary. That's their burst. After an hour of lunch, taprooting this dream, we came up with this awesome icon of he was in oil and gas, so he had now moved into a new kind of oil business. And it was the cannabidiol derrick, we called it, right? That was shining above Calgary and feeding the landscape with a new kind of economy. But the problem was the cannabis industry was emerging in Canada And big pharma was influencing opinions and attitudes towards quality cannabis. It was a really interesting and a complex landscape. Our objective was to build a lot of brand advocacy and engagement, to establish Boaz as an independent family-owned and operated brand, which they were, and focus on the care and attention in handcrafted cannabis. And we had to accomplish all of this without any paid advertising, because you can't in cannabis, and solely with content marketing. This was a content marketer's dream, as Allison said. We couldn't pay a single cent for any boosts, any paid advertising on any channel, any perceived claims. Anybody who works with cannabis knows how limiting it is in Canada, according to Canada Health Canada. But wow, what an opportunity to truly differentiate a brand. And our solution again went right back to the source. We built a foundation with the source and some additional strategic brand architecture tools, position them pre-legalization and post-legalization. So we walked them through legalization into the market. And the result was, in the first 12 months, almost a 50% increase in total social following. We had a 43% average engagement rate. It just through the roof. And this is unpaid. This is all organic, and a total of 21,000, almost 21,000 total engagements, okay? Meaningful engagements. So this is a little taste of what happened with our cannabis client. Our third client, I'm not gonna tell you what happened because we've just started with them. They're Mountain View Printing. They're a printer in Calgary. They've been established for 35 years, full service print business, primarily serving a B2B local market. They're well invested in innovative technologies. These guys have bought some of the most amazing leading edge digital presses, and they're poised for, but they're in a crowded market full of, like full service printers. Everybody's calling themselves a printer. And there's an opportunity to differentiate this established business, and we just started. So you'll have to stay tuned with this amazing group of people here. Okay, I think we're ready to do the work. I think I'm doing quite well on time, Marie. I am so pleased with myself. That was a lot to get through. So we're gonna start the lean brand building. And this is an opportunity for everybody to follow along. So if you wanna get ready for this part of the conversation, Marie, I know you've been good. You've got your lean branding blueprint in front of you. And I'm gonna be working with you. But before we kick this off, I wanna, again, share some key principles, okay? For everybody, keep this in the background. Remember, I've shown you these extraordinary engagements with clients. They took months, sometimes years to work out, but lean is no less potent, okay? So principles apply at any scale, whether I've worked with a client for months or whether you do this work for an hour or a few hours. However, simple it is, deceptively so, as Yoda would say. And you need to do your own work while you follow along. Let's start with introducing the lean approach, some foundational stuff, okay? I'm gonna work with 4 core elements. And again, back to my tree, my favorite tree, it teaches us everything, okay? So even though the blueprint contains a lot of elements, you probably saw a lot of things on those blueprints, we're only gonna work with 4 core elements in this blueprint, what we call a lean branding blueprint. If you only take on these pieces, you will have at least have the spirit, like the spine of your brand building foundation in place. You can build out from there, but without a strong central spine or a trunk, you won't be able to build anything. You can't hang your branches if you don't have a trunk to hang them on. So think of the analogy of a tree again to visualize this. I like to think of values in blue as the leaves on the branches that reach high. Okay, if a company was truly transparent about its values, and the doors were open and the windows were clear, you would actually be able to see through. You would actually see these values. So I like to think of them as the leaves on the tree. They're highly visible, and it's the values that exchange energy and oxygen with the environment. Down from there in green is vision. Vision is basically the branches up, moving upward, right? Reaching and growing into the future again, highly visible and external. Your vision is where you look up to where you're going. The mission I like to think of as the trunk of the tree, right? The strongest core of the tree where the roots grow And the more solid, right? And the more straight that is, the more straight and solid the brand is. And then lastly, culture. I place culture in the roots. Well, specifically in the ground that the roots grow in. Think of the culture as the matrix that the roots grow in of your brand. And the more solid that root is, the more solid the ground is, the more stable the foundation for the tree. Your culture is no different. We found that in our work, the culture is definitive as a foundation. If it's missing, if it's off, if it's out of alignment, then the brand starts to fall apart as you move up the trunk and into the branches and the leaves. Okay? So this is what I mean by as above and so below. There's the connection between the blueprint and the tree. And the location of values in our conventional blueprint, our full blueprint, of vision sitting above, and of the mission just below the core axis, we call it, those concentric rings, and the culture at the very bottom of this mandala. So it's in exactly the same space as your lean brand building blueprint, okay? So remember, the blueprint is a schematic for the structure and the systems anchoring all growth and development of a brand. And we tell our clients that it informs everything, like throughout all their creative, their strategic work, and even their operational development. They can check back to this mandala. So it captures the essence of the brand. Like I said, it's the soul of the business. If you know who you are and what your business is at its essence, you can never go wrong. Here's a connection and a comparison between the blueprint on the left, which is our conventional full blueprint, and the lean branding blueprint. Okay, so you know what you're dealing with. And this was the handout. This was the freebie, if you will, that was handed out earlier. It's the one that Marie's given the attachment to, and the one that was sent out to everybody, and you can still access this. This is yours to keep. I encourage you to work with it. It's really valuable, and we're going to show how valuable it is right now, okay? So remember, lean on the right is no less potent, and principles apply at any scale. Ready to work, Marie?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, and you know what? For everybody listening, you can simply follow the presentation. Okay, you could listen and get a feel for this and do the work later. I really want you to get the essence of it. Or you can do some of the work on your own lean branding blueprint, whether you do it on do it as a PDF and fill it in that way, or whether you do it with pen and pencil. I do think there's a real value to holding the piece of paper, right? Remember that we are a hypersensitive psychic consumer ourselves. So, all of that, 68 billion times faster than conscious processing speed comes through your fingers, touching the pen, putting pen to paper, really holding your brand, cherishing it, make it tactile, make it real, okay? But I'm gonna move through this as quickly as a demonstration and try to cover everything. You'll be able to catch up and ask questions at the end. So let's start.
Okay.
Values. So remember what I said, Marie. Values are the leaves on the branches high up in the sky, right? Transparent, reflecting everything that reach really high, okay? So here are some examples. These are 3 different clients we've worked with over the years, 2 of which I've shared already. The third one is our printer. But that doesn't matter, because what I want you to look at is the range of values, right? Everything from, compassion, love, integrity, and courage, to transparency, family with our cannabis client, confidence and education, key values if you're going to go out and share cannabis as a medical product. And then our printer, respect, the way they work with their people internally, pride, ownership, and of course, experience craftsmanship. So here, where the rubber meets the road, in the lean branding blueprint, we'll just take a couple minutes. Marie, I know you've had a quick look at this, but the values get informed by answers to these questions, okay? The whole point of putting the questions there are to make you step out of your head, actually, and start to source something, start to uncover it, start to pull it out of the ether. That's kind of how this process works. So if I asked you, Marie, let's do a bit of this, right? What's the most important thing to you or your team? You're answering as Elevate, right? So you're going to answer as your brand, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, what's something that's most important to you and your team?
Value, providing value.
Okay, so providing value. Got it. And that would be a value for you. I know they're the same word, but fundamentally, value of itself, in the meaning of it being important or useful for people or valuable, right, is a core value for you. Okay.
Yes.
And when have you felt most alive? How did you feel?
Right before click and go on this webinar here, I felt pretty alive.
What was the feeling? What was the feeling? Was it anxiousness or was it excitement or what was it?
Nerve-sighted,
Excited?
nervous and
Awesome.
excited at the same time. A big kick of adrenaline, for sure.
Awesome. What were you most excited about?
Uh, I mean, I've been putting this thing together for ages, so it's just exciting to see it come alive and being able to connect with everyone.
Awesome. So I would assert that possibly one of the other values you hold dear is connection.
Yes.
You actually said that, right? So
Yes.
this is how it works, everybody. You can work with someone else too on this. This is a really good, I'm just realizing now, Marie, this has been awesome for attendees to like if anybody's listening, you could do this work with someone else, right? And especially if they don't know anything about it, get them to be a neutral person who asks and listens, right? And so there's a number of questions here. You can see like what qualities you love in others, right? It's a really great to look at it. What's really important to you when you work and play with others, and what do you want others to say about you? But let's leave it at that. So I love that, Marie. Value and connectivity or connection.
Yes.
Great work.
Thank you.
You ready to go?
Yes.
Vision. Okay, so remember, vision are about the branches, upward reaching and growing into the future. Vision is so simple because it's actually what you see. The only challenge is you got to see it 10 years into the future, or 10, 15, 20 years in the future, right? You have to use your imagination. Here's some examples. I believe in really short vision statements, right? They're potent when they're really short. So you can guess the life coach. Her vision is a revolution of fearless warriors celebrating passion and coming alive. Isn't that awesome? You really want to work with her. Okay, and the cannabis client is a locally rooted global brand for a transformed cannabis culture. That is what they're seeing 10 years from now. And my printer, the Media Lab, they don't even want to call themselves a printer anymore, leading the future. Okay, so ready to jump into this?
Yes.
What does your business look like 10 years from now? What does Elevate look like 10 years from now? Paint the picture for me.
No idea.
Okay, let me ask you
Like
this.
tomorrow, can I just look at tomorrow?
No, I'm not going to let you get away with that. What do you hear people saying about you in the future? What do you want them to say about you?
So I see Elevate in the future. I really want to disrupt the conference industry, and that conferences can be virtual. That's what I see.
Awesome. You are a virtual disruptor.
Virtual.
In the industry.
Ooh.
Is that awesome?
Yes.
Right? And so this is how it goes, right? And you can answer it by asking questions like, when you open the door into your business, what do you see? A lot of people are really literal. Like, we have people actually tell us the color of the door handle,
Right.
10 years into the future. And what difference you see business making in the world. So that'd be a ripple effect, the impact, right? That's being noticed, okay? So that's awesome work, a virtual disruptor. Now, mission, you ready for this?
Oh, okay, let's do it.
Isn't this awesome? High speed, right? High speed brand building. So client A said their mission was creating access to freedom and the courage to love. What client would not want to work with that kind of coach? Okay. Client B said homegrowing trust and handcrafting happiness. Isn't that awesome for cannabis?
That's perfect.
And client C is all about resetting the value of print, and it's a play on words because setting print was the old world of lead, right? Lead type, setting lead type. So, Marie, answering for Elevate. What's your why at the core? Why do you get up in the morning?
Oh, this is deep. Oh, this is hard.
I know, it's awesome, but
Why?
just grapple with it, right? What
Um,
fires you up? Like literally, why do you wake up and go and do Elevate?
because it excites me that I can create something where people can connect.
Awesome. I can create connection.
I can create connection globally.
Yeah, I can create connection globally.
Yeah.
That took us 5 seconds. And you want to keep looking, right? But it's all about intention, Marie. Great work. Anybody else listening, you could ask yourself, why does your business exist? And I think the key question that I offer my clients is, I said, what experience are you in the service of providing to your customers? And for Elevate, it would be, that creating connection. That's what you provide.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing? Okay,
Really
last
cool.
one, culture.
Culture.
Deep and rich. You thought the last part was a deep dive. I'm not going to ask you to write whole paragraphs, right? But our life coach said that their culture is a lean-in culture built inside trust. Absolutely beautiful, right? The cannabis client said, we are farmers on a brave frontier. What an awesome image, okay? And client C, our printer, our team runs like a well-oiled machine. Literally, the entire operation runs like a press they have that's 70 years old that's still running in their shop, okay? So let's dive in with culture. If you were to think out, imagine, source this 10 years into the future, okay? To a built Elevate, 10 years into the future, creating connection globally, okay? What's it really like working with your team?
Well, we're disruptive, so we have to be extremely creative and have an environment where things can be tested, tried, without fear of failure. Just put things out there and
Beautiful. We have an environment where things can be tested and tried without fear of failure. Just that one sentence, Marie, speaks volumes. Can you see if you actually had that written down in a source document in perpetuity, and you were about to hire someone or they were going to join your team, and you put that in front of them and they were not a fit for it, they're not a fit for your company.
yes.
It literally is one of the most amazing assets that a source document becomes. But culture can continue to get answered by what's it like to work in the office? How does it feel? How do you want to feel when you work with your team? And how do you want to develop yourself in that environment? And how do you want the team to see itself? And even what are the people saying out there about the culture? If brand is truth, if the internal experience, right, of, internal expression of culture matches the consumer experience, then brand is truth. So if they feel that, if your clients and your audience feels that it's safe for them to fail as well, then brand is truth for Elevate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So let's jump into the end of this. Applying this. Why the hell would you do it? Somebody's got to be asking, this is too hard. Why would you do it? Well, I say because it works. It's that simple. I'm not going to add any more to that. When would you do it? Any time to start is a good time. Okay? I'm working with a client now that's 35 years in, and we're rebranding them. They're taking a fresh look at it. And our cannabis client was a startup. The guy was in the oil and gas business. He'd never grown a single cannabis plant, okay? How do you approach it? Really simple. Tell the truth. And does it work? No, nothing works. You really have to work it. That's simple. You know that, right? It's not like you fire this up and Elevate's just going to run itself. You have to work it.
That's so true.
That's a big secret of every entrepreneur shares, okay? And then using this. I prefer to think of, as opposed to using something like a reference or an information or a yardstick or something, why don't you create something so potent that you're being used up by it? Be used up by the distinction. So true up your brand, and it's a process, okay? Remember to watch for alignment, balance, and integrity. Those were the three principles I shared with you at the beginning. And also remember that the blueprint sources the business. And what does it actually source? Our clients always say two things: clarity and confidence. And when the blueprint is no longer true, guess what you do? Change the blueprint. Wow.
Reprint and rewrite.
Rewrite it. Yeah, absolutely. It's yours. It's yours to source. Okay. So I want to close things off. I think we're doing really well. I'd like to leave you with a few things. Number one, do the work. It makes a difference. Number two, don't cut corners. The only person you'll cheat is yourself. And if you're the CEO, if you're a leader, you will cheat your team, and ultimately you'll cheat your business and your brand, okay? And get your brand trued up. Said another way, no more bullshit. In fact, one of our first workshops with a gang of creatives was the end of the era of bullshit, I think we called it, or something like that. It was like just straight on. It was like, no more. We've been responsible for too much of that with our propaganda and our persuasion and our mass manipulation. It's time for a new kind of branding. And the last word is take your first step. Okay? Just take the first step. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Oh, I hope you enjoyed that, Marie.
Oh, I did. I got a
Crash
lot out of
course.
it on
A crash
my little
course.
scribbles. And it's so nice to have this lean branding blueprint, because it's nice to just have a guide of, you know, where do we start? What do we do? And these questions are super helpful. And I also really liked your tip about just getting somebody in, even somebody who doesn't know about your brand or what you're talking about, just to kind of reiterate what you're saying. I think there's a lot of value in that as well. So
Beautiful.
if you haven't started, take this, you know, sit for an hour, write it out. I think you'll find that, man, you'll get a lot out of it. So